not go be on Twitter today.
And we're live. It is Tuesday, April 6th, 5:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Julia Angwin, founder and CEO of The Markup, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and an all-around incredible human who I met, I think, the first time when I was as a PhD student, and you called and asked about the new governor's piece, and it was pre-publication, and we just chatted about content moderation for forever, and you wrote a groundbreaking piece for ProPublica, and it was great. And now you are running your own org, and so welcome to the show. So nice to have you.
Cheers. Yeah, cheers. I brought fake beer. So
excellent.
I've been drinking that too.
It's very
good.
It's a good fake
I like it a lot, right? It's the best part about the IPA craze is that it's filtered down to non-alcoholic beer and wine. Totally. Yeah.
Because it turns out during pandemic, I need to be drinking beer way earlier in the day in general.
And you have to, and you get into this thing and you're like, I should just trick my brain into thinking that it's drinking earlier, and it's not actually.
So wait, we have questions from the Greek chorus. What is this fake beer? So let's set it up as a sponsorship to give companies the idea. This episode of In Lieu of Fun is brought to you by Run Wild
Brewing Company.
Run Wild.
And if you work for the Athletic Brewing Company and you want to make this a regular thing, get in touch, because we would love to have you as a sponsor.
You guys have any sponsors? You should.
No, not even one.
Oh, we almost had Venmo, but then we didn't.
Yeah, but then I made too many bad jokes about them.
But then there was also I can't censor Ben at the cost of sponsorship. And so it was a very principled decision.
Who's going to have anything bad to say about fake beer?
No, that's right. Fake beer it's where the future is. Yeah. And so please pick up a fake beer, toast in lieu of fun, buy some Run Wild from the Athletic Brewing Company. And as I say, if you work for the Athletic Brewing Company, send us a note. We'll get in touch.
And I do want to say that I got interested in Run Wild from Emily Bell. So she's the original. I just want to say she's the original. She and I were having beer Zooms until we realized that no one could ever add an extra Zoom to your day. But that was early pandemic. And she introduced me.
I love that woman. She should come back. We should have her back on. Yeah. That was great. That was great. So nice. But sorry. To everyone who does not know, Julia, and I brief introduced you, but I'll large introduce you, which is just basically in the more informal sense, Julia is just obviously one-time Pulitzer Prize winning, 2 times Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist for her work specifically around privacy and data, and is really kind of the gold standard in many ways for data journalism and really deep, hard dives into some really hard issues that no one wants to talk about how hard they are because they're not sexy enough. And you were at ProPublica for a long time, and then you left, and I will kind of leave it there. And what did you do when you left?
Yeah, so I had the best job in journalism. I mean, ProPublica is a great place. I had been at the Wall Street Journal for 14 years, and going to ProPublica was this super treat because it's all investigative. You don't have to feed the Daily Beast, and you don't have to write the little news stories that the Wall Street Journal wanted me to do. And it was, and I built a little team, and we started doing investigations on privacy and then on algorithmic bias. And but ultimately, I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to set up a newsroom for the future. I grew up in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and I have to be honest, I have libertarian coding bro in my blood. I kind of was born into it in the early days, right? I started programming in 5th grade. Steve Jobs was doing a program to teach elementary school kids to program. He paid for our schools to have computers, and we had the first Apple at home. My parents were total computer geeks. And so I was meant to be in technology. And I rebelled to go into journalism, but when I rebelled but I ended up covering tech and feeling like journalism needed to have the weapons that computation allows you, right? Like journalists are outgunned, right? There's 8 to 10 PR people for every journalist. And we needed to have every weapon at our disposal, and not having computational skills was a big problem in newsrooms. And it's interesting that like most newsrooms have data journalists, but they don't speak data journalism. Do you know what I mean? And so I wanted a newsroom that was built from the ground up with programmers and journalists. And that's why I left to start The Markup, which we just been publishing now for a year.
And so let's talk about what's within and outside the ambit of The Markup. So when most people hear digital journalism, I think they divide into, broadly speaking, 3 categories. One is coverage of digital stuff, i.e., tech coverage, tech policy coverage, tech development coverage. The second is computational journalism, what Nate Silver likes to call data journalism. That is journalism fundamentally driven by processing data the way people who do computational analytics of one sort or another will do, whether it's statisticians or political scientists or whatever. And then a third is, I think some people, it comes to mind the sort of Ashley Feinberg kind of data, stalking people basically as a form of reporting. As one of the people who Ashley has stalked and actually stole my identity for purposes of some of her reporting. I'm not.
I didn't know this story.
Yeah, no, she sent an email to Jim Comey when he was FBI director on an email from an email account that used my name, and it said in tiny letters at the bottom, "I'm not really Benjamin Wittes. Hence, this doesn't violate the CFAA," basically. But that was, and she published a story about it because he responded to it and didn't give up his passwords in response. So somehow
he gave up his passwords. No, he didn't. Okay,
he didn't. She wanted to. So it was like, can we get him to give up his passwords if he thinks he's doing it to a friend? I don't remember the details exactly what she asked him for. He didn't give it up, and she wrote the story anyway. But there's a more and less respectable side of that sort of work. I'm not a fan of Ashley.
Julia's like, holy, there should be some type of internal review board for like.
No, I mean, I just say like undercover reporting is controversial, and you can do it with computers or without computers. And I think like it's really important to know that like in general, like I was trained in sort of mainstream journalism where you would not do undercover, right? Like that's just not considered okay. Some people do it. Mother Jones, there's a reporter, he went undercover as a private prison guard. That was really illuminating. And I think like when the public interest is so important like that, it can be worth doing. I'm not sure that the story you're telling where the public interest feels like it's large enough there.
Yeah, or it feels like it feels actually, I don't know. So here's another way of putting it. Like public interest aside, there's a public disinterest. Let's put it that way. Like actually reporting a story in which it turns out that you can hack a high-level government official, the director of the FBI, just with an email would be bad in any number of ways. It would be good in that it would probably a thing we need to correct, obviously, but it would be bad in the number of like bad actors that it incentivizes to try to then hack high-level government officials with like really bizarre emails.
This is always the question, right? Like, so, people ask me all the time, like about sources and methods, right? Because the truth is like journalists, we're not picky, right? Snowden stole those files. Like, and I legit reported off of them. And I think that's a fair, I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I thought the public interest was strong enough on the stories that I worked on, which were only 2, that like, it was something that I would say, like, it was done it was illegal. They were obtained illegally, but the public interest was important. So for me, the threshold is always public interest, right? I agree. Like hacking, I don't know. Like if an FBI director is hackable, look, I mean, I did a story where Surya, my colleague, went on a boat outside Mar-a-Lago with a
Surya's been on the show.
Yeah, did he talk about this story? So he's on a boat.
No, I don't think so, but I want to hear this.
Right after the election, and he has a Wi-Fi scanner, and he just scans all the ports, and he's like, from the boat, he's like, oh, Mar-a-Lago is entirely open ports, and I could hack it. I didn't hack it, right? So that was our ProPublica story where we were like, it is hackable. So showing that something is hackable can be news, right? But we didn't do the next step of going in, right? We just showed that there were open ports. So like, it depends. I don't really know in Bend. I mean, I think the thing is taking your persona, Benjamin, that's like a personal affront, you know?
I gotta say, I did like, here's the article in question. I mean, look, she, I didn't mean to focus on Ashley. I just meant
no, sorry. I just hadn't even heard that. I was
and as you'll see from the article, it's not entirely clear what she did. But she, you know, she describes that that they sent an email to Comey and apparently believing that it was for me, he opened it. Now, apparently believing it was for me would have been because, you know, and they tried to get him to, all of these officials they sent them to click on it and, you know, fill out some data, which he didn't do. And so they reported that he responded, want to be careful with this. Is this from you? Which of course it wasn't. I took a little bit of affront at that, but my point was about the nature of digital journalism.
Yeah, I can go back to that. We can go back to that. I just got distracted.
When you guys, and by the way, you know, when Ashley later did I thought very good piece of investigative reporting that outed Jim's Twitter feed, for which I think she deserves a fair bit of credit. She found his Reinhold Niebuhr Twitter feed. She used a whole lot of metadata involving me for that as well, which I don't have a problem with. I do think assuming my identity was, for purposes of an email phishing attack, was a little below the belt. I'm just not sure below whose belt. But I guess my question is not about that. My question is, what is it when you guys say you do digital journalism? What is inside and outside that?
Yep, absolutely. So I would say that, you know, the thing that I feel like I actually haven't come up with a name yet for what this idea is that I have. So I don't have a real, I don't have a packaged answer. But the thing that I believe is that, you know, a lot of people, when they think of data journalism, they think of Nate Silver. And I think that's right, because what he did was he brought sophisticated statistical analysis to journalism. His real insight was that, you know, a meta-analysis of multiple polls was more robust statistically and more predictive than any one on their own. And that entered an era of statistical analysis in journalism that I think is really important. The thing that I have brought is a next step to that, which is he works with existing data sets, right? Polls that other people have done, baseball statistics, right? There's honestly not that much. When you think about existing data sets, there's the Fed, there's baseball, and there's polls, and he basically does all of them, right? So my thing is, data itself is who collects it is political. So we collect our own data. So what we are is doing, we are doing the statistical analysis, but we do this massive, intensive data collection where half of our newsroom is programmers who do heavy duty scraping. We do kind of crazy things, like we've built our own custom web browser that we've paid 2,000 people to install that are letting us monitor their Facebook feeds. That gives us a national representative panel to see what's happening on Facebook. That's the kind of thing that's like original data collection that really isn't done in most journalistic newsrooms. You would go to Brookings and get a report and write on it, and maybe you might do fancy statistics on an existing data set.
So what makes it journalism rather than social science? Or
yes, everybody asks me that. Why are you just not a social science outfit. And I'll tell you why.
Really? People ask you that?
All the time. Oh my God. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not a trained social scientist, so that would be
oh well, I'm not a trained lawyer, but
I'm
that
not a trained journalist.
Okay, so, but I would say this, like, journalists serve a different purpose than social scientists. And here's our purpose. Journalists have always been the first draft of history. We bear witness, right? We are not actually always in the world of reproducible, peer-reviewed results, right? There's a difference between those two. And I want to make sure we're the first ones over the fence. Do you know what I mean? Like, because we are the ones, you have to witness the war before somebody can then analyze the war. And so we are not as rigorous, right? We're as rigorous as we can be, but not as rigorous as social scientists. And so we can go out with things like, for instance, like what we have found through Facebook is like, our panel it's 2,000 people. There are 2.7 billion people on Facebook. You know, how representative is it? Not that representative, but it's better than anything else anyone else has, right? So it's basically like, what I tell people is we've scaled up interviewing people at the diner, right? Used to be a journalist would interview 3 people at the diner. Now we have a panel of 2,000 people we've interviewed at the diner, right? I'm scaling up anecdotal work, but it's not all the way to the level of social science.
Isn't the other difference, because it seems to me a lot of social scientists would kill to be able to develop the data collection mechanisms that you have. It seems to me the other difference is that the output that you're producing is not written as social science. It's written as narrative or descriptive or analytical journalism.
Well, 2 parts to that. Okay, one reason that social scientists don't do what we're doing is it's legally risky, right? So the difference between a First Amendment lawyer like Nabiha, who's our, president and general counsel, she's a First Amendment attorney who's willing to take risks, knows how to defend news gathering that is at the cutting edge. What we're doing with this Citizen Browser project on Facebook is cutting edge, right? It's legally unclear, right? I'm sure
it's not only legally unclear. I don't think it's very well. I think you are, like you said, the first over the fence. I think that you're not just groundbreaking, you're groundbreakingly unappreciated, like how much you're groundbreaking.
As your lawyer in this conversation,
yeah.
I just want to say, I don't think you should say it's legally unclear. I think what you want to say is, what you want to say, that's why I cannot be accused of representing a client, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer. But as your lawyer, I think what you want to say is, while we're confident we're on the right side of the line wherever it may be drawn, yes, it is the case that line has not yet been drawn.
Thank you. That is exactly what I meant to say, Ben. And that is why I should be sitting next to me on all these calls, because I'm just like,
we're going to have her on one of these days. We're just like, she's like, a lot going on. You guys have been so busy.
So that's one thing to your point, Ben. But the other thing is, so one thing is, a lot of social science people, like the people who are lawyers for universities, are not really, that's not their risk tolerance level, right? Like they would like really settled case law, and so that's a different posture, and it's harder for them to do this work.
Yeah.
Secondarily, though, I would say we do produce 2 kinds of outputs. With our stories, we publish kind of an academic white paper for each one. So we do produce sort of something that looks like social science as well on our big investigations. And we release our data sets, we release our code, we have those methodologies. Actually, we do a kind of peer review like process. So we send them out before publication to experts to get reviewed. So we do kind of do, like, so I'm a little bit sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth here when I'm saying we're not social science, because we do a bit of it, right? I just don't want to say that's what we are. We are primarily journalists. We are in it for accountability. We are not in it. So academia is a little bit more interested in novelty. We're actually mostly interested in accountability. So the questions that we ask are about accountability. How can we hold Facebook accountable for the decisions it's making? We're not always as interested in novel theorems about the way the world works or the way that information travels,
Super interesting.
So can I actually say something? Sorry, go ahead.
What
No, you
what
can't.
you
It's not.
after you,
no,
Kate?
Yeah, no, how many are, I don't know, actually know the size of things now. How many are there after 1 year?
How many people are at the market?
Yep.
We're like about 25.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of draw something out because I feel like, I don't know, Ben, Julia, had you guys met each other before this?
No.
We have been on a number of email chains with
Yes.
one another. And I believe there was a time about a year ago when you were in fairly regular touch with Susan Hennessy about matters, and I was party to those conversations.
Oh, yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Without being on them. But I don't believe we have ever actually.
We were actually formally.
Okay. Well, that was like superfluously awkward. What I meant was basically that like there is like a lot about both of you. So Ben was at the Washington Post as an opinions writer for a long time, and is now obviously is the editor-in-chief of Lawfare, which also straddles this very weird kind of counter law review space of like reporting in national security and matters of politics and matters of deep wonkiness and kind of matters of record. I think that like Lawfare is a place of record for a lot of things, and I think that the markup is a place of record for a lot of privacy and data journalism. And it's like it is absolutely. And so there's kind of this interesting, what I'm excited about as a person who is like not quite a generation below you, but like both of you, is like the things that you've created are deeply hopeful for like the future that I feel like I want to be a part of. And this idea that like there is a need to fill this interstitial space and this interdisciplinary space. And no one is going to be like a lawyer. Like not everyone, like you can do good legal analysis without being a lawyer. Thank you, Linda Greenhouse. Like you can do kind of deep legal, you can do deep like kind of privacy analysis, and you can do all this other kind of stuff. But there doesn't always need to be this, I don't know, this pigeonholing into things. And I love that both of you like straddle this space. So I don't know. I'm just sorry. I'm being super dorky and I'm not trying to be sycophantic. I'm just like actually just like kind of like sitting here and thinking like, wow, I'm so glad that both these publications exist and it's so wonderful. But kind of to pivot to kind of some of the really constructive stuff that the markup has done in the last couple of years as Ben launches himself into the sun. I don't know what you're doing.
What's going on?
Pardon me. I did not intentionally do any of that.
Is like, Julia, like talk us like a little bit through like, I don't really want to spend a ton of time because I think you've done so much good work, but what are you proudest of? Like, what are your top 3 things that you're proudest of coming out of this year with the stories that you guys have done?
I would say if I had to pick 3 things, I would pick the Citizen Browser Project, which is this, insanely ambitious national panel.
Insanely ambitious.
It is insanely ambitious and insanely expensive.
Wait, can you also tell people your bumper sticker that made me laugh so hard?
The scraping is not a crime? No.
No. The tears.
Oh, math plus tears?
Oh, yes, that's what it is. Like, yeah. What was that?
Math plus tears is kind of our motto, which is like all of our stories are basically math that generate tears or like.
No, I feel like it was like the way you described it was like you're like, it was right at the beginning and you were like math plus tears equals markup. And it was like, or something like that. We're going to put it on a bumper sticker. And I was like, I didn't actually think of it as, it's interesting you said our math generates tears. I thought of it as like basically as like journalists and everything, that there is like so much hard work and sweat equity that kind of goes into
it's true.
Working through the math.
Roles. Like we cry a lot also while doing math. So there's
Right,
also
exactly.
that. That's true.
Who doesn't cry when doing math?
Yeah, exactly. And I studied math as my major in college, so I know. But I would say like, so the Citizen Browser Project is, I feel like really one that I'm super proud of because it's something I've really wanted to do for such a long time, is to get a real view into what choices Facebook is making. Because a lot of questions you can ask about Facebook, but the question we're asking is, what did they choose to highlight in people's feeds, right? And we found some interesting and kind of shocking things, like that they went to Congress, promised they weren't going to promote political groups during the election season, and then they did. They recommended them, and not only were they recommending them, they were recommending them heavily to Trump voters, and they were recommending groups that were organizing the insurrection in the weeks leading up to the insurrection. And and Mark had gone to Senate Commerce and said he wouldn't do that. And there was no way that would be known if you didn't have this kind of panel, because you can't see group recommendations. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of our Blacklight privacy inspector. We have this amazing page, markup.org/Blacklight.
That's perfectly named.
It's basically, because it's meant to eliminate the creepiness on the internet. So you can put any URL in and it runs an instant real-time privacy test of what are they doing. Are they fingerprinting your browser? Are they running session recording? Are they moving? Are they monitoring your mouse movements, scroll movements, the keystrokes? There's nothing like it out there. And then I'm really proud of our Google work. We scraped 15,000 Google search results, categorized them, and showed that Google allocates the top 40% of the page to their own products, right? So like that it was a quantification of something that everybody already knows, which is when you see at the top of your Google search results, there's all these little boxes and it's like stuff that links back. Somehow you always end up back in another Google search when you click on it. But quantifying it gave people a real opportunity to, and honestly, regulators who are bringing antitrust cases, to put a number to something that is going to possibly lead to policy regulation. And so I feel like those are the kinds of things I'm really proud of, where we can really quantify and distill something that you might have already known about. And that's why I'm saying, like, none of these things are novel. It's not novel that Google is preferencing itself. It's not novel that the internet is filled with creepy privacy. It's not novel, actually, that Facebook doesn't do the things it says it does. But we feel that it's important to prove them and not just have a hot take about them, No,
well, you'll all be pleased to know that while Julia was describing this, I ran Blacklight on Crowdcast to find out what it is getting from all of you now. And here is the answer. No,
I'm actually
it's actually not bad.
I don't think Crowdcast is that bad. I did this once, years ago, a year ago.
It says 2 ad trackers were found on this site. This is less than the average of 7 that we found on popular sites. 2 third-party cookies were found. This is less than the average of 3 we found on popular sites. This website loads trackers on your computer that are designed to evade third-party cookie blockers. So that's not
campus fingerprinting, not great.
That's not great. Yeah. And this site allows Google Analytics to follow you across the internet, which I think almost all sites do. Should we move to a different site from Crowdcast?
There's no winning. The problem is, it's not like there's a clean site, although I would say the markup is 0, of course, on all of these.
Lawfare doesn't do any of this, I don't think.
Yeah.
We may allow Google Analytics to
here's the thing. So when we show Google Analytics on Blacklight, we're not talking about just general Google Analytics installation. We're talking about the fact that they have a setting that tracks you when you leave that site. So that tracks you across the web. So they've merged it with cross-web tracking. That's what we're highlighting. Google Analytics itself, if you're just using it locally for your own analytics, we don't highlight that. So that's just a distinction that may not be obvious in the way it's written. But basically, there's a setting that a lot of websites don't even know they've turned it on, right? And that's often the case, right? A lot of this stuff is just buried in some setting, and who even knows, and
So this is interesting. This says
amazing.
that Lawfare does some things that I had no idea that we do.
Of course, that's right. That's always
I'm going to have to talk to our people about it because I don't know why it says we're doing that, and I assume if it's not wrong, we should adjust the site because we shouldn't be doing those things.
A lot of people have come to us and said they learned things because of our of Blacklight. Because the problem is, websites are they're kind of like archaeological digs. Somebody put something in there and then layers 5 more years of software on top of it, and everyone's forgotten that thing is there and it's still running and still tracking.
Yeah, and also you have these accumulations of code over time that it's not obvious. Like anyway, that's
No,
super.
being partnered with a coder. Actually, we were like, he is like regularly tasked like this. So he's like a deep back end kind of like person, and he is regularly tasked with cleaning out kind of code and like updating it. And first of all, this is a thankless task because people like just like do not care. If you're not making it go, then it is not like this is like, and so this is, but this is also a really like, it's interesting living with him over the arc of my kind of trajectory and looking at kind of these companies like closer and closer, which is just also that there is the incentives are really weird and bad in a lot of places and a lot of workplace environments for like how to create this kind of stuff. There is no incentive for going back in and cleaning up the code and cleaning out bad types of things like this. And I'm not going to say it's like if you've spent time on it, it means that it's taking time away from projects that they want you to be working on that could save the company money or doing something else. I don't want to speak for his company in particular, but yeah.
There's no liability, right? So like to go back to law, right? I mean, ultimately software is this beautiful product where you can just launch it and it like, breaks everybody's computer and it's their fault. And like, and it's just, there's no liability. And so there's no risk market, there's no insurance market, there's a whole structure that happens once you have liability that really would improve products. And I feel passionately about this because my parents were software engineers. And back then when you sold
I never knew that.
In a store, it was $60 in a box. It was shrink wrapped. And I spent my weekends, like I would go into the lab and do QA testing because they were like, if a 10-year-old could break it, like then that's a good way to test software. So I grew up in like the old school time when people really did try to put quality. And now the whole fail fast, iterate is really what it really is. It's about beta testing and quality testing. We're the testers, the consumers, right? And we're also the product. So it's just like, that is sort of what incentivized me to write about this field because I saw change in front of my eyes.
So what's the long-term goal with the markup? Is it to become, to be your own site that produces your own content for publication on the markup? Or is it more ProPublica-like, that is, ProPublica fundamentally lives in its partnerships with news outlets that it essentially feeds in one way or another?
Yeah, ProPublica has changed. I was there up until a few years back, and the balance of how much they partner versus how much they do their own has shifted over time, and they do much more of their own. And we're doing this, we're kind of doing a mix because the truth is we're too small, right? Probably no one here has actually heard of The Markup. So please go visit it, themarkup.org. But like,
I've just put a bunch of stuff in the chat while you've been talking, Julia. Like people, please, I've placed, if you like what Julia is saying, please donate to The Markup. There is also, I have put links in the chat to Blacklight, and to the Citizens Project. Please, other people feel free to repost them. I can only repost them once because some strictures on tech are good, so that I cannot like profanely repost things or trolls can't. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But go ahead.
And I would say so our goal is we do partnerships. We've done New York Times, The Guardian, Consumer Reports, and we'll do more. But our goal is to get people to read our stuff. So whatever it takes to do that. Ultimately, we're a news outlet and we want to distribute the best way we can. But I would say that my goal personally is to build a field. I want there to be more journalists who bring computational skills into the beginnings of their projects, who use them as a core piece, who have built that into their practice. And that's just not something that currently exists. And so in most newsrooms, data journalism is a little shop and you go and you try to order data from them like a hamburger, and then they don't have time because there's too many people ordering data. And so this is different. All the data journalists report to the investigative editor, just like the reporters do. They're part of the team from the beginning. So that's what, from my point of view, we're trying to experiment with a new way of building a newsroom that has computational expertise built in from beginning. And I would love, so what I would love is sort of like what I saw as Nate Silver's success is when the Upshot copied them. Like, I think that would be success for us too, is like if people started copying us and building those kinds of teams at other outlets, I would say like, good, that's what I want to do. I want to build a field where journalism is basically doing better, you know? Like, honestly, if we could just get our anecdote level from 3 per story to 10, that would be better.
Well, and also, if I can venture the hypothesis that sort of upping the skill level of other news outlets is, I agree with you, that's the ultimate sign of success. And it's one actually that we've never had, you know, like nobody at any other newsroom has looked at Lawfare and said, wow, we should invest in significant legal and national security analytic capacity because we're quoting this thing all the time, right? And that suggests that there's some capacity there that we don't have. I don't expect that we're going to ever do that because our specific skill set is on the analytics side. And the analytics side, of course, they'll think they tend to think of as a think tank, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas your fundamental insight here is on the is on the actual reporting side, mm-hmm. right? It's a methodology of
methodology. It's more than just reporting.
Yeah, it's a methodology of reporting.
Into the world. We're like collecting them and creating fact collections. Yeah.
So, and so I guess my question is, you know, you have these incredibly ambitious reportorial data gathering and analytics projects that we've seen over the last few years. Some major news organizations like the New York Times' attempt to reconstruct all of Donald Trump's finances. You know, some of them are in outside, you know, startups like yours. And I guess the question is, given how expensive it is, and it's really expensive.
Really expensive.
Is it a kind of specialized future of a very select kind of newsroom? Or is there any prospect of making it kind of the bedrock? You know, you can't hire 25 young reporters and pay them dirt if you expect them to know how to do code and think how to code and how to think analytically and think like put together these sort of ambitious projects and then execute them. Is it the kind of thing that 3 or 4 newsrooms are going to be able to contemplate doing and nobody else is? Or is it the kind of thing that we should just expect to be like we expect news organizations to have decent polling shops? We should expect news organizations to have decent, you know, data journalism operations.
I mean, I think, Ben, the reason Lawfare exists and the reason the markup exists is because journalism's been hollowed out. Like, that's actually like why, right?
100%.
I mean, Facebook and Google took all the money. There's no money left. So like literally like the creation of targeted advertising meant that the death of contextual advertising. Contextual advertising was, when I worked at the Wall Street Journal, a full page ad was like $500,000 because that's the only way you could get that middle-aged guy with a Beamer and a golf game. And he was a middle manager at IBM. That was the only place you could get him. So people paid a premium. Now you don't need to get him there. You follow his little tracks around the internet and you find him on Deadspin when he's killing time between meetings. And you don't even know that you're on Deadspin because you just bought some weird ad network, right? And you're just tracking his behavior through creepy technology. And that's it. That was the destruction of the news business. There was no way to sell a quality audience anymore, right? And so the destruction of that model means that there are going to be a few people like me who are funded by, like, essentially it's like a Medici model, right? There's a few rich billionaires who fund a few fancy newsrooms to do cool stuff because it makes
the patron model.
Yeah, we're in the patron model, and I don't think it's the right thing, but like, dude, what am I going to do? I gotta live in this world.
And by the way, some of the patrons of the markup are the same people who fund lawfare. You know,
but this is
right. There's only a few of them.
But Julia, like Ben and I were we had Ben Smith on and Matt Iglesias, and we've had like other people, and we're talking about Substack, and we're talking about how this is changing journalism, and like part of it is like there is like, I think it was Toy Tanks in the chat before I said it was like it's cheaper to quote people than it is to do the journalism yourself. And I think that that's such a great point. It is cheaper.
Also,
hot takes are the cheapest.
there's an interesting conversation to be had about whether Substack can fund any substantial number of opinion writers. There is no serious conversation to be had about whether Substack can fund the kind of operation that Julia is building and describing.
No way. Not even an option.
Like the decimal points are in the wrong place.
Yeah.
No, but you're like, I feel like you're guerrilla fighters. And like, when I say you're like, I don't know, we could like run through the metaphors and cross them all we want, but like first over the fence, guerrilla fighter, like, but like honestly, I mean, there's a lot of truth to it. And I actually I just think that there is the Citizen Project in particular, like the blacklight thing is very cool. And like, it is actually a wonderful tool. And by the way, hold on really quickly, Genevieve, I'm going to go to your question next, just so you know, before I like rapture you on screen. But one of the things that I want to say about the Citizen Project is like basically this idea that like no one's going to ever collect this data again. I don't know, care what you call it. Like in this way, in this particular model, it is a brave, important moment. And like, I trust the markup to do it well. And like, yeah, I don't know how much there is to say about that, but I just think it's super important. So, yeah, go ahead.
Ox Joman.
Oh, I lied. I clicked the wrong button. Sorry, Ox. Sorry,
Genevieve, you look different.
Yeah, Genevieve looks different. Sorry, Ox.
I mean, if you want to go to her.
He isn't actually Ox, it's Hex. And I made this joke earlier and no one got it. And then everyone corrected me in the chat. And so now we call him Ox because we have to. Sorry, that's the backstory on the joke, Julia.
The question was, does the markup have plans to follow a particular story over a long period of time, and specifically maintaining the technical infrastructure needed to do that reporting? It seems like Citizen Browser is an example of that, but like, are there others, or is there, other examples, or is Citizen Browser like a one-off?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Like, so basically, my feeling is that our job is to be watchdogs. And honestly, the very best way to be a watchdog is to be a persistent watchdog, right? Because the moment that the eye of the public turns away from something is when the bad things happen, right? And so as much as I could make these tools persistent monitoring tools, I do. So Blacklight, Citizen Browser are both persistent monitoring. They're expensive. It's very expensive to maintain software and keep it upgraded. And so what we're trying to figure out right now as a very young organization is, do we sunset things, or can we try to find endowments to support these tools going forward? And so I guess my answer is it's an open question.
And because I'm just trying to keep everyone on their toes, again, I clicked on Genevieve's icon and got Chris Argyris.
That's the ultimate vision of hell when you click on Genevieve de la Ferrer and Chris Argyris shows up instead. That's how you know you're being punished by God.
I really thought at first I clicked on the wrong button, and it's like, no, I keep clicking on the same button, and it keeps bringing. There's some glitch in Crowdcast. It's probably because Ben ran Blacklight on it, and they're like,
and it's retaliating.
Christopher Argyris, your question, sir.
All right. Good evening, Julia, or afternoon. So I'm a former journalist myself. I began my career, I was J school graduate, began my career sort of traditional media, NBC News and San Francisco Chronicle, Examiner. So I was wondering, it was routine sort of in the pre-pandemic years, especially if you're on Twitter, to see journalists, starting a thread with some personal news, and like it was usual for them to like to move because of restructuring or downsizing, to change jobs almost like every year. And so I wondered sort of what do you see as like the future of this nonprofit public service journalism? Do you see it providing more of a, I don't want to say stable, but sort of a more retention of journalists that it's not in a corporate profit driven market to sort of have retention and pursue different stories that are not.
I mean, one of the many ways that the world has turned upside down is that nonprofit journalism now is more stable than for-profit journalism, right? And that is like a crazy thing, having spent most of my life. I started at the San Francisco Chronicle, by the way. But like we're like brand new. But like, honestly, like places like the Chicago Tribune are closing, and like, so it's just like, it's crazy that I can go out and tell reporters who I'm trying to recruit, like, no, we have like 2 years of money in the bank. Like it's fine. That to them is like amazing. Like, what, 2 years? That's like a promise of lifetime employment in this field,
Look, there was always a nonprofit element of journalism. It was not, it's not that the big journalism companies were nonprofits. They weren't, but they were always, family-owned newspapers were always making less money than they could.
Yep.
And the reason is it was not necessarily cost effective to deliver to every house, which they generally did anyway. And there were certain areas of news that everybody believed to be more profitable than others, and people did other stuff anyway. And that was always a public service dimension of the industry that people just accepted, and that families, and they were generally families that owned newspapers, accepted as sort of the public service dimension of running a newspaper rather than running other things. And I have said this before, that died on the three-legged stool of the local department store, the local, which, as those accounted for an enormous percentage of display advertising. And when local department stores went under, that dried up a lot of local newspaper revenue. The second was local supermarket chains, the coupons. And the third, which was, also just blown up by the last 30 years, was monopoly distribution or duopoly distribution mechanisms. And you take those three things away, and it is not obvious how you fund the less profitable components of journalism, particularly once you add in their place what Julia's describing with Facebook's ability to follow people around and have the ads follow them to where they go. And there, at long last, is Genevieve, who is being retaliated against by Crowdcast.
Genevieve, and I've never met you.
For the number of questions she got to ask yesterday.
I know, right? Okay.
Hi.
Hello. So not all data collection is the same, and not all scraping is the same. But assuming that data collection, and specifically like data brokers, are using individual persons' data as a commodity, do you think that one of the biggest challenges for new competitors in tech is their lack of available information about their users, because that they would then use to compete with the more established companies? And how do you balance the equities in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like, a lot of people fear that like all these proposed tech regulations will actually just entrench the established players with their power and put in too many barriers for the smaller players.
They will. That's why Facebook supports them.
And so, yeah, that's a big concern. But I think I think you also have to look at the question of micro-targeting. of advertising, right? What we're talking about a little bit, right? The ability to follow people around. And I would say like there is a clear kind of compelling narrative that's emerging that it's like, doesn't feel like it's that healthy for our political process, right? And it doesn't feel like it's that healthy for our, for the state, right? It's destroyed their ability to sell their audience. Now, I think you're right, Ben, there's other factors at play, but like it's a huge factor. And so I think it's worth just thinking about whether there are certain things that maybe just don't necessarily serve the public at all, right? Which is why Europe is considering like rules against micro-targeting, right? And so I think that there's some balances to be made. And I would say like the thing that I want to point out is that as a journalist, I'm really good at highlighting problems. I don't really have the solutions, but I do try to diagnose the problems as clearly as possible so they can be solved.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, and I as a poor legal academic, I do the same thing. So I'm going to get called on it a lot. But because people are like, well, you're the one who's supposed to be telling us the answers. I'm like, nope, just telling you all the problems. But so one of the things that I'm very curious about is something that Genevieve said, which is the idea that you have a solution in something like Europe or something like competitive or a different type of economy that is going to be setting rules for journalists that are going to be kind of held to this global standard now that we're all publishing on platforms. And do you feel like, I haven't asked you yet, like, what are your feelings about the GDPR and like anything that has kind of flowed from that for journalism and for starting a journalism website and a site that like is clearly compliant, like high marks level compliant, like above compliance with GDPR. But what do you think like about that going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I don't know whether we don't track anything about our audience. So the weird thing is that we don't know what we don't know. So we're like, we could be missing some incredible insights, but since we have no idea, it's hard to know whether that's really impeded our growth at all.
But can I ask you about that? Because we don't track stuff either. We don't collect data on the readership.
Yeah.
And yet we know our readership intimately because of feedback loops that are non-digital in nature, which is, audience response to things, the emails we get, the response over time that shows the influence of particular pieces. And my guess is that you actually know a lot about your readership, just not through the mechanisms similar to the way Facebook knows a lot about.
It's a great way to put it.
It's qualitative research, right? Like we have a lot of qualitative information, and like I would say it's interesting because our audience is very global, right? Like we are based in New York and like have reporters around the US, but we don't do as much coverage as I would like of international issues because we're just too small, but our readership is very global. And like, that's one thing I just know because they email me and they write to us and they donate. And like, it's just something that's really special and cool that I didn't expect. And so there are cool things that we have learned and we're trying to figure out, can we do more global coverage to serve those people more, but it also is possible they're just coming because they want to know what's going on in the US. Honestly, the US stuff affects them a lot.
Oh, it hugely affects them. It hugely affects them. I was just in a conversation today with a bunch of scholars about this, about like trying to escape the U.S. boundaries of like thinking about like First Amendment doctrine in relation to content moderation and other types of things. And like, it is very narrow, especially when you consider the 7% of like Facebook users are from the United States. They might be the most buying users of like this. So that's like kind of, as you would point out, but like to get to the micro-targeting aspect, but they're not the people who are using it. And so trying to create some equity there is kind of, I don't know how you don't end up in the conversation about capitalism and that's like kind of, which is like a conversation ender. But that being said, we have 2 more questions, and Oz, you get the penultimate question. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you. Thanks for taking my question. I believe that Facebook and Google are probably among the worst offenders in terms of tracking you, keeping your data. So, but within the contents of freedom and the world of relentless surveillance, we'd like your opinion on Facebook pushing back against Apple for their efforts to provide iPhone users actually control the data tracking and privacy. I think it's outrageous that we're not all screaming at Facebook and saying, enough. But so I'm looking forward to your opinion.
That's a good one. I mean, look, I don't know that we need to scream because Apple didn't listen to them and their screaming hasn't had any impact. So I think in some ways, like, it doesn't matter that they're mad. Like, Apple's going to do what it's going to do. Like, it's really fun. Like, it's a little bit like Greek gods, right? You just sit here as mortals looking at the gods battling each other.
That is the first time someone's used that metaphor to me, but that was so resonating when you said that.
Yeah, that's what it is. We're just like, we're pawns in these little systems, right? Like, all of them have their problems and also their benefits, although some I think have fewer benefits than others. But the truth is, like, Facebook yelling about Apple's thing, Apple was like, dude, I own the phone, like, whatever you want, go away.
Yeah, I mean, but it's so interesting because I just taught the FBI, like the San Bernardino, like FBI Google case. And in that sense, like, these private companies are our best hope against.
Well, yeah, because there's no,
but there's no choice. And so,
right.
like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not saying that's
this is not a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to say that these are like.
When you're worried about government surveillance, the company may be your protection. When you're worried about the company's surveillance, you need to think about a different mechanism.
No, I think that's so right. But what we're used to, I think that, like, as a society, that we're used to really not ever thinking about the company's surveillance. And so it was like, and when the company first showed up, it sold itself to us as basically being about helping us through any type of government surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, it was
like
great
allowing
gig.
us.
They sold us that gig. It was like fun, and everybody was into it, and it was like fight the man, But then, like, these companies are bigger than any government, and they actually control political discourse in most nations, and so it suddenly becomes like, well, I don't know. What's my due process here? Like, I can't elect a new government the way I can here, Like,
the oversight board will say.
The oversight board, yes. I
just like increasingly, well, we'll see. It's 2 weeks away, guys. 2 weeks
Richard
away.
Wattenbarger. Despite liking Bruckner,
Hello.
you get the last question.
Oh my God, will you shut up about Bruckner?
I'd like to just identify this as the ultimate question.
Okay, what's the ultimate question?
So, the ultimate question. So, I know we're in a state of uncertainty as far as the legal status of web scraping is concerned, but I'm curious about what the sorts of future rulings, short of a total prohibition, what sort of future rulings you're concerned about and on the lookout for, and for that matter, is total prohibition more than a remote possibility?
On web scraping and just generally data collection techniques.
Yeah.
Well, we filed an amicus brief in the upcoming CFAA case at the Supreme Court, arguing that scraping by journalists should be protected under news gathering protections. And, we'll see whether that holds any water. But, we believe that there's a case to be made there, and Nabiha, my brilliant colleague, made that case better than I could. And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only legal risk we face, right? So Citizen Browser is a bunch of people who've installed a tool that allows them to basically donate their Facebook data to us. And, Facebook has put a cease and desist to NYU for exactly this practice, saying that the Facebook users don't have the right to give their data to someone else, right? So there's also like a data ownership question, like what do the terms of service allow you to do with the information that Facebook displays to you, right? So there are a lot of questions that I think implicate our news gathering techniques. And just haven't honestly been addressed by the courts.
They have not been addressed. I can, as someone who is about to teach literally CFAA for 101 tomorrow to Cornell Tech, there is these are unaddressed issues. And everyone who is kind of thinks that the oversight board kind of like is going to scoop in and like, or like that there's going to be a preemption type of issue. Like it is just like this weird advisory body that was created. It is only that. And it is a court, and like in the sense that it's a court, but like, I don't know, like in the sense that it functions and like tries to kind of dress itself as that. But there are really, like, I think that you're exactly right. There's some real legal issues. So CFAA is a US law, and that like needs to be addressed and updated, and like how it's kind of borne out needs to be addressed and updated. And that's not going to come from like the oversight board. That's going to come from US courts. So, and sorry, that is a weird place to leave it with CFAA, honestly. But I was going to say, like, I would just like to say one last thing, like, Julia, like, what are you hoping for the next year? Like, are there any big projects you can talk about, or anything else that you feel like optimistic about?
I wish I could. We could never talk about stuff, but we have some really cool stuff. So I'm really excited about the stuff we have coming. And I will say this, we talk a lot about tech, but we write a lot about things that you don't think of as tech. So for instance, like last year we did tenant screening algorithms so that landlords are using to deny people housing based on incorrect information. And
just sent it to all of my first year property students. Unbelievable gift.
But we're doing more like that. So like, we don't just focus on the big tech that you think about, but there's a lot of crappy tech being used to discriminate against people in lots of ways. And so just stay tuned for more on those fronts as well from us.
Oh, thank you so much for coming.
Julia Angwin, you're a great American, a great journalist, and a great media entrepreneur in the nonprofit sense of entrepreneur.
Yes.
And do come back and join us again soon.
Thank you. This was so fun. Really appreciate it.
Tomorrow,
even with fake beer.
With fake beer.
Yes.
Tomorrow on the show, we have Chuck Rosenberg, who is going to join us to talk about his Washington Post article, gently criticizing the FBI director for the FBI's performance on January 6th. I have less gentle criticisms of Chris Wray for the same matter. So we will see whether Chuck and I can come to an agreement regarding the appropriate level of irritation to feel at Chris Wray. That'll be 22 hours and 55 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
We don't have any more, but you can donate to the markup.
You can.
And you should. And so I'm going to drop the link again to donate to the markup in the chat. And please donate to the markup and support efforts like this, which are, I think, personally, some of our best against this figuring out this battle with like regulation and technology.
And which don't engage in identity theft in order to do it.
No, exactly. It's so nice, right?
I mean, we just on a low bar, Ben, but we are leaping over.
I'm look, sometimes
you didn't mention how short the fence was.
I mean, look, I'm just dealing with the standards that apparently exist.
Yeah.
So,
and also, happy birthday to Reverend Dr. Hillary Livingston.
Indeed.
Happy birthday, Hillary. We didn't know that. And, no, it's very lovely. No. Anyways, we do
will see you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.